This is the podcast commentary for episode 111, Taming the Mind. So, as we always start, I like to start with, discussing what your inspiration was, either for the title or how you came up with the topic.
Well, how did I come up with the topic? I was getting a lot of questions from the audience, actually our community, on, wow, my mind, I carry around all this clutter. I carry around thoughts, objects. How do I just empty my mind? And the mind, I've always been interested in the mind. So that's why I call it the mind's metabolism. How does our mind function? And we know that we talked about that, I believe, in our last one about the mind. And I'm continuing because we're getting such a flux of interest. That's the only reason why I'm doing it. And when I talked about taming the mind, it's because our mind is an energy field. It's the process of observation, let's say, or relational observation. And so we really learn to tame it, meaning we're not going to break it, we're not going to beat it up, we're not going to chastise it. But what we're going to do is tame it. We're going to let it come under our conscious control and use it as an instrument. It's almost like tuning an instrument. You're not going to break an instrument like to get it tuned, right? You're going to fine tune it. And if you've ever gone to an orchestra and in between each set, everyone will be fine tuning their instrument. That's what the mind is all about. So taming the mind, I didn't, I've done workshops and I'm putting together a course now for the spring market on detoxing the mind because that's been requested, actually, that word. But I wanted to talk about taming the mind, how we can bring it under our conscious control in a very gentle, loving way. Because the mind needs to be massaged, not, we all know that if we say, oh, I'm just not going to think about that anymore, what happens? Boom, an image comes up. It pops right into our field. So that's where I came up. And that was last minute. It was actually just going to be called The Mind. And I said, well, that's kind of boring. I don't think anyone's going to want to just see the mind, even though I'd probably open it up and want to see. And then as I was writing, I thought, oh, maybe we're talking about really taming the mind, how we bring it back gently. And I've trained dogs before, and you know my love for dogs and animals in particular, but dogs specifically for training. And I thought about it when I had guard dogs. And when I had one of them, I always remember I had to be really massage her. And I looked at her energy as I was writing. How did I really work with that energy? I tamed it. I didn't break it. I didn't break the spirit of the animal. Just like horses, I used to do riding and break animal. Actually, they used to call break your horse in. I never did. I always massaged it and tamed it and communicated on that level. And then when I was doing practice in meditation, I was saying, wow, that same principle that I used with the animals all these years, I could actually do that with my mind. I could actually be gentle and say, hey, mind, why don't we come back home now? I've heard Pandit Rajmani Tiganayat say, bringing the mind back home, and it makes total sense. And as I mentioned in this podcast about Vishoka meditation, it's a great book, a new book that just came out. But it's about bringing the mind back home. And how do we do it gently, lovingly, not with, oh, I have to just be focused. I have to do this. It'll never work. Just like with a dog, some dogs are scared into being disciplined, but the real great trainers will do it with gentleness because nature responds to gentleness. We don't have to be harsh. And that's what taming the mind is all about. That's exactly what my mind was thinking when I did that.
Very interesting. I like it. One of the first things that you mentioned was modifications of the mind. And, sometimes I catch these key words that we take for granted because I've heard that and read it in all the books that we study. But sometimes we get questions about what that actually means. What are the modifications of the mind? And in our last discussion, we talked about the viruses and the habits and the programming. So I thought it would be a good thing to bring up since you didn't go in depth on the modifications of the mind in the podcast. It would be nice to talk about in the discussion of the podcast.
Well, modification of mind, what I'm really referring to are the functionality. For example, are we really aware of what aspect of our mind are we using when we're dreaming? What aspect of our mind are we using in deep sleep? Is our mind still there? What are we using? What aspect of our mind are we using when we're awake, like you and I are talking now? But then there's the reservoir of unconsciousness. But when we've mastered our mind, like the yogis have, the masters, that's why they call them masters, they understand and they're able to access the mind field and work with all those, what we call modifications. They're able to access and be aware of the dream, and you don't even have to have the dream sleep, right? Just like deep sleep, they're even awake. And it's out on the yoga market, the marketing of it, of yoga nidra, where you would actually, it trains you systematically to really start working with those modifications of mind. It's not necessarily what we're taught in the mass market, because it's a practice that could take lifetimes to really accomplish. Because you would be in deep sleep, for example, and you'd actually stabilize the mind and watch that aspect. And the master that I had privilege to work with when I was very young, he was at the Menninger Foundation in Kansas, and he was able to be totally asleep and be aware of what was going on around him. And that's when you have control over the modifications of the mind. And the masters have achieved this. They're adept in that area.
Right. That's a great story. I remember reading it in a couple of the books, and it's fantastic. That's the one where he stops his heart, right?
Oh yeah.
Right.
And I even mentioned here where you can actually control disease processes. Again, understanding how that energy field works. We create it, we take it away. And
Right.
it's very interesting. So that's always fascinated me from the health and healing perspective. And I mentioned that in the podcast this week also, because that's my field of interest. How do we really heal ourselves? Well, we have to have control over our mind to do that. And
Sure.
I don't mean control again, it's a taming process.
You said something about the masters telling us that sloth and laziness is the greatest of sins. So we really it takes work, in other words. And so I know we get a lot of questions about getting started and how do I overcome inertia. Is sloth and laziness, a big problem after we decided we're too lazy to actually
You
make
know,
it happen?
it's not a way that we're punishing and using bad words. I can tell you, sloth and inertia was the word I was actually looking for when I spoke in that podcast, and I forgot the word we always talk about. How do we overcome inertia? Sloth and laziness is really inertia. And inertia is one of nature's energy fields. We have it's tamasic energy. It's that energy that's not moving. It's sloth, inertia, or uh, I'd like to call it, it could be in a positive way of stability. But when stability goes a little too far, or that type of stagnation goes a little too far, then it impedes our development. That's the point here. So it doesn't mean not to rest, not to take time, but sloth and inertia is when you know you have a duty to do and you just keep putting it off. Or when you wake up in the morning, and I could attest to this, you say, oh, just another 5 minutes or another 10. To overcome that, the pleasure of, say, staying in bed for that extra 10 minutes, that feeling under the warm covers, especially if it's freezing in your bedroom, that's where the mind becomes very fine tuned. That's the taming. And you always feel better once you awaken. Your mind will awaken you, and once you awaken, it's much better off. In fact, this morning I was having that as an experiment. I got up, eyes wide open at 20 after 4, and I thought, well, I could have 10 more minutes. And what happens is the actual energy field of the mind changes because the nostril dominance changes, which changes your whole nervous system. I did the experiment this morning just to make sure that I'm paying attention. And so that sloth and inertia is what keeps us from writing the books. How many people have said to me, wow, I want to write a book. I want to really go learn something. And it's not that sloth and inertia are, I don't want to say that we're bad people because this happens. It's natural. That's why I'm bringing it up today. It's just a natural process. The mind has a tendency to want to just say later, next time. And what really brings that sloth and inertia is when we're not really fine-tuned with who we are. Our enthusiasm for life is just getting a little bit tired, or we think too much. Our mind has become exhausted with the worries, the mind chatter, the dialogues that we have. How many out there have had dialogues with themselves? I hopped up into the woods this morning before we we're having to be recording this morning. So I said, oh, I better, get into the woods and do some, we had a lot of snow last night. So I wanted to go, and I was up there, and I was fine up until like the last 10 minutes. And all of a sudden the mind chatter started saying, I wonder what time it is, because I don't bring my cell phone with me. I wonder what time it is. I better get back. We have to record today. We have to do this. And so the mind chatter starts. And that then we become very tired and lazy because we exhaust ourselves with these dialogues that go on. So it's not just that we're bad people. We're not bad people. It's just, it's a habit of the mind to have sloth and inertia. That's my point.
Yeah, well, it comes down to the law of motion, which is what inertia is. An object at rest tends to stay at rest, and so you have to
Yeah.
overcome that to then, go into motion. And of course, an object in motion tends to stay in motion.
But then we talk about motion here for a minute. Then we have too much motion. And that's the too much movement going on. And that's what we're experiencing more in the culture now with cell phones, iPads, messaging, and when we're on these super drinks that really, charge up our adrenals, spill out all our hormones that we need, our epinephrine, and we're just running and running and running. That'll exhaust you too. So it's the opposite of the inertia. So it's the opposite. I mean, either way, it's a problem, but we have more of our problem with inertia. Like we know we need to get up and meditate and really train our minds. We know we need to get up 10 minutes early. We know we're supposed to eat a balanced diet, move our body, exercise. We know all of this, but what prevents us from doing what's good for us is what inertia is. It's not
Gotcha.
just it's not just movement, sporadic movement. It's we know what we need to do to have a joyful life, be a better parent, be a better facilitator. We know to be healthy what we need to do, but yet it's whatever keeps us from that is what I'm talking about when I say inertia or laziness.
Gotcha. And the point of that is that it takes work, and I think our community is used to, creating the intention and then doing the work. We have to do, that's why we call it practice, right? And that work or that practice is actual work in order to achieve the goal.
Well, yeah, knowledge and practice. I do writing this in my new book, and I've done it in all the courses that I've done. It started with the resilience training. We could have all the knowledge in the world. We could read, people say, well, how do you learn? And I'm bringing this up because I just had a discussion with someone. You don't learn how to train an animal, tame a dog or a horse. You can read first, but you have to digest that material, and you digest that through experience. You can read all you want on how to teach an animal to, let's say, heal, be within your space and stay by your side off leash. You can read about it, but until you try it or have the experience, you haven't really done it. It's you That's what I mean by practice. And our community knows about practice because we could talk all day about meditation and training and breathing, but you have to do it. And when you're aware of what you're doing, that's where the training and the practice comes in. It's really, we're training our awareness. That's what we're doing. We're waking up. We're not inert anymore. So we're waking up, and that waking up is you could be sitting still and not be lazy because the mind, I'm talking about the mind here. So I'm aware of how my mind is processing what it's doing. I'm aware of its modifications. And at that point, I'm no longer lazy because we're paying attention.
So let's get into in the next part of the podcast, you talked about the three questions to ask yourself. So the first one about, making the decision, and then, are you determined to do the work? We just talked about, it takes work and practice to do knowledge and practice. And then the third one, how long will it take? Uh, you know, for the intention, minutes a day, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or that kind of thing. So,
So if we look at those questions, I came up with them based on first of all, I start with a firm decision. You have to make a decision. You have to decide with an intention that, well, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? I think I brought that up last week.
right.
Should I do it? That's exhausting. And that's the what part of the mind? Remember what we talked about that? That's
The
that
monkey
manas
mind.
part. Yeah, that manas part of the mind, that thought, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? So once we get beyond that, we can make a decision. I will do it, can do it, want to do it. It's a sankalpa, we call that firm decision that I want to do it with the bring our will into action. So a firm decision is necessary because that will carry you, that will fuel it, that gives the fire to carry it forward. And then I spoke about, are you determined to work with yourself? Because things are going to happen and things aren't really, development is not that easy. Working with the self, working with the mind is not that easy, especially when ego comes in play. We all want to create this, I don't want to say all, but many create a facade, of this is who I am. But when you really start chiseling that away, you say, wow, look at that delusional mind that I've had. I'm doing this, I'm talking about from experience. Wow, I thought I was somebody. No, no, no. I'm really just on the beginner's path of learning how to navigate. And so you have to be really willing, you have to be sincere and genuine about working with yourself. And then once you do that, start easy. Say, look, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes a day to be with myself and really allow my breath and my mind to coordinate. Remember, mind and breath go together. So working with the breath automatically starts training the mind. And I didn't make that up. That comes down through the lineage and through masters. And it's brought up in that, for those that have gotten it or are going to get it, the Vishoka meditation. It's laid out very well there, or even, and in the courses that we've been teaching for 15, 20 years, take time for that. 10 minutes is nice to start, and then you work yourself up to 20 minutes to a half an hour, and you're fine tuning your mind. In the past, I used to say, you would never go out the door without you wouldn't, if you were a musician, many of you might be, and you would always fine tune. I play guitar a little bit, and you're always fine tuning the strings. You're always tightening them, loosening them, etc. And so you wouldn't think of just start strumming without tuning it. Why do people run out of the house in the morning without tuning their mind? And so that's the whole idea. You have to really work with it. How long will it take? A lifetime. It's a continual process. Life is a continual process. And when it's done, there'll be another life to do it. And then when you're really complete, then it won't be a problem anymore. You won't be asking how long will it take? Because it takes whatever it takes. There's no beginning, there's no end. It just is.
Right. Well, often we get questions about getting started. So in the next part of the podcast, you talk about what to expect in the beginning. And I know when you're learning something new, you don't always know what to expect or how to interpret your experience when you first start out. So you don't know if am I doing it right? This is one of the questions. How do I know I'm doing it right? And setting those expectations. I know folks can take the courses, and so that's a good start. But for those folks that are listening right now, maybe you can guide them on those expectations and how to interpret them, how to work with their mind, basically to tame the mind, so that when they start experiencing it, they know what to expect.
Okay, first of all, working with the mind, the basic 101 class would be watch your breath. Watch your breath at the tip of where your nose meets right here, where your nostrils meet your upper lip. And just watch the breath as you inhale and exhale. And if there's no jerks or pauses, and it's smooth and even, with the inhalation flowing into the exhalation, very simple, not so simple, because if your mind says something, this will change. This changes, the flow changes according to the thought. So just keep working with that. Now, I brought up imagination. What happens is when we go to sit down, what happens is many times we get an image. An image is a thought. And so it may be an image of peacefulness or not so peacefulness. And these just being aware that that's what the mind does. The mind is thoughts and it creates images. So as we allow them to come because you're not going to stop them. That's the key. Remember, we're taming the mind here. So when we tame the mind, we're not really saying, oh, stop thinking that. Just say, wow, step back. That's interesting. What's next? Because as I say in the podcast, what's next will come right up. When that thought's gone, another one fills its place because the mind is endless thinking. Now, over time, when we work with the breath and we bring the mind back home, so we're not out there anymore, we're bringing it back into ourself. We're going inward rather than outward. The thoughts will start to quiet down and the space between thoughts will start to expand. And it's that space between the thoughts is where our peace and harmony come. So, what to expect? Expect anything. There's no, when I learned, no one ever said, expect this, do this, because then that creates another thought of expectation. So just have the experience and watch the breath and see what comes forward for you. That's what I would tell people. There's no right and wrong. There's no right way to do something, no wrong way to do something. Just follow the breath and watch, and it will unfold right in front of you.
What do you tell the folks that say the mind cannot be tamed? I have too many thoughts, or I just can't wrangle them because I sit down and try to be quiet, try to breathe, and then these thoughts just, flood my consciousness.
I think I put that in there too, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly. And the reason why is because I usually get that response. I can't meditate.
right.
Well, you can't meditate because no one's given you probably a systematic way to do it. No one's really teaching you how to focus that on the breath and why the breath is important. Again, you have to know your why. You remember, George, you and I have always spoken about that. We need to know why we're doing something so that we could hold that base of moving forward. So the mind definitely can be tamed. It's something you just need to understand the mind and that energy field. Remember, the energy of the mind is the essence of your life. There's no questioning that. So we need to start understanding that. So the way we tame the mind is not just to say, "Oh, I'm going to sit down." I mean, they have all these programs where you put on some headsets and you're going to entrain your mind without having to really do the work. They're going to do it for you through this sound. Well, that's short-lived. You'll always be depending on that. Why not really work with the energy of the mind and start doing it? It's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. And so people get discouraged. I can't do that. Well, how about just start walking and paying attention to your breath as you're walking? That would be a start because there's no mystery. There's no mystery to this. The only mystery is breathe. And we breathe. The interesting thing about breath, we go on breathing whether we're conscious or not of it. So once we become aware of it, then we can use that as to propel us forward and to understand the workings of the mind. The mind can only really be understood in a very skillful way by understanding the breath. And I wasn't going to talk about breath too much because I really didn't put that in because I've done so many courses on breath, but it's very, very important and it's the basic 101 requirement anytime you're going to try to calm down your mind. If someone doesn't just show you breath, run the other way because breath is that link between the mind and the body. When your mind changes, your breath changes. When your breath changes, your mind changes. Pay attention to that, write in, and we'll have dialogue on that because that's really the key of taming the mind.
Right. And often when I get objections from students about, I can't meditate, my mind is just too
Right.
crazy. Okay, forget about meditation then, and let's just breathe. Practice diaphragmatic breathing and start there, and then the meditation comes automatically almost. But when you put too much thought into trying to get
Yeah.
something that you expect, okay, then let's go back to breath and go back to basics, basically.
Well, expectation is even in the great people who are very skillful at meditation. You might have a great session, let's say, and you're able to really bring that mind back home and feel that that joy that exists. And then when you sit down the next day, you say, I want to go right, I want to have that again, my expectation. Just when you have the expectation, you don't get it. It's just interesting because, again, that's a modification of the mind. That's a mind saying, I want this. Once you start that identification, then it could become actually an obstacle. And that's where, when I talked about detoxing the mind, what do we mean by detoxing the mind? We mean let's create space in the mind, create that space between thoughts.
Right, which of course then leads us, once you've made the decision that created the intention, you absorb the knowledge, create the practice, right? Do the breathing and detox. Then the next is the ability to focus your mind, because everyone wants to focus and be productive.
Focus is something that I have spent my life working with, and I continue to practice that. It's not, again, it's not the beginning and it's not the end of something. It's more, how do you take that energy? So first you collect, contain, but how do you concentrate it? And we concentrate it right about here. This whole area right in here is where we using our body as feedback. I say in many of my writings, use your body as feedback. This is your living, this is a manifestation of that whole mind. It's the home of the mind. So the area here. So the mind can actually, when we bring it back here, we're bringing it back home. So we bring it in and bring our concentration here, and then just follow the breath there. And you'll find that'll expand. There's nobody that's going to teach you meditation in the essence of put you there, but they're going to give you the tools that will bring you right there. And it really requires relaxation. Now, not just relaxing the body, but relaxing the nervous system, relaxing the emotions, relaxing the physical body, mental body, subtle body, all of it. Just relax, even spiritual relaxation, knowing what is our purpose, right? Our intention. So all of that we wrap into bringing our attention here, focusing on the breath, and your inner journey will just automatically open up. It opens up like a roadway, and it just requires practice. And so if you get distracted, something comes up. Let's say an image comes up. Just watch the image. That's okay. It's just part of life. It's part of your whole mind field that's going to do that. So focus. There was a study, and I reported this. I wrote a blog on it. This was quite a while back, where focus creates happiness. Studies have shown that when the mind is focused, we're happier. And I've always said to people, how many of you, and I know I did this when I was in graduate school even, uh, you have a project to do, you're writing something, and writing is difficult. I have always found it difficult. And you start, well, maybe I'll clean. And cleaning people get really a lot of joy. Well, the reason why is because they're focused. I used to go out and mow the lawn by hand, just push the mower. I used to love it. I'm focused. I feel like something's accomplished. So focusing the mind does bring a lot of joy. And when you can do it at will, and you know the modifications of the mind as we started, when you're able to take all that energy and collect it and concentrate it, then you start really enjoying things, saying, wow, let me go to my cushion and sit down now and practice. I'm going to try and see how maybe today, how that will feel, what that will do. I'm going to bring my mind back home and see how long I can hold it in that space. And then, well, an image might come up, then be aware of the breath, go back to the breath and bring it right back again. And that's the beauty of life. And once you start getting that confidence and start enjoying it, because you're not judging yourself, oh, I can't do it, I don't want to do it, this is not for me. I had somebody say to me yesterday, well, you still get disturbed. Why do you meditate? Well, I'm a human being. But when I said to them, the way I always answer something like that is, wow, you could imagine what I'd be like if I didn't. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
people who eat health food, all they have to do is get a cold and someone say, see, you're eating, people out there are probably hearing this. See, even though you eat good food, you're still getting sick. Well, no, it's not something that is either there or that not there, but still eat healthy food, have healthy thoughts, and that will take you a lot farther than having sloth, like we talked about, and inertia and saying, I really don't need to do it and I can't do it. And that's just because of sloth and inertia, actually, that cause those statements, actually. It's a very subtle way the mind works. The ego comes in and says, well, yeah, we don't really need to do this. It's not going to work anyway.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I really like the next section where you talk about the school of meditation. By the way, that's probably what we should call the online course area because it really struck me when you said that. Oh, I really like the school of meditation. But anyway, you said something about if the school of meditation saying that if you meditate regularly, that you won't be sick. That's pretty powerful.
Well, again, the medical aspect, you remember when I did the Feeling Good Matters book, the subtitle is really not great for the market, meaning it should have been 20 or 12 lessons to do overcome fatigue, stay sharp, etc. But I put the yoga of mind, medicine, and healing, and because that's the umbrella of all the work that we're even talking about. It's the yoga of mind, medicine, and healing. So medicine is very, very important to me, but not medicine medicine to attend to. And I always said it's attending to the gut. So how does the school of meditation fit into all of that? Well, the mind is what really affects all of this ultimately. And if we just took as an example our endocrine system, you know, our endocrine system is that system, the collection of glands that produce the hormones that regulate our metabolism and everything else, from sexual function to sleep to mood. And they secrete the hormones into the bloodstream, and then they go to target areas, right? So stress is part of the endocrine system. And so who's controlling the stress? It's our mind. When we tame the mind, we're aware of all of that. And that's the point here. So when we're aware, we're going to be able to work with our endocrine system in a very skillful way that we don't fall prey to the diseases that are started in the mind. And I would just say stress would be the easiest one for us to even talk about today accurately. But we can control our stress by with our thinking. It's how we perceive a threat. So that's what I meant by in our school of meditation, and that's what we'll talk from now on. That's what we'll say. The school of meditation says that we can really control our wellness and illness. Remember, wellness is looking at we as a collectiveness. Illness is considered I. What do we talked so many weeks about the ego? I-ness. Illness is I-ness. Look what's happening to me. And so that's what bringing the mind back home. You'll start recognizing that you're not the body, you're not the mind. You're the user of the body, you're the user of the mind. And once you get a glimpse of that, there's nothing stopping you. You just go right for your freedom and fulfillment in this life. There will be nothing that stops you because the knowledge is already within. And that's what the school of meditation teaches. The knowledge is already dwelling within, right inside. And we just have to open the door, with our intention, step through, and everything right there. It's right in front of us to really live with joy and fulfillment. And that's what we're meant to be living with. And that's the whole point.
And in the next section, you talk about East and West, and of course, you are known for bridging the two sides. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that. We always get questions. Some of the questions tend to be, Western biased questions, while others are Eastern bias. You talk about having it within, which is, of course, an Eastern thing, but you also ground it in science. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the bridge.
Okay. In the West, we look at the mind as the brain, and they always have. They're learning not to do that so much. And in the East, and I say the authentic East, not the popular East, we're talking about the mind. Now, it was, I think I quoted in the podcast about Freud saying, and not that I'm a fan of his by any stretch, but that, you know, if you know the part of the mind that's unknown, ready, that's the modifications, you'll know everything that's known. And that's not rocket science right there. So what we're really talking about here is seeing the bridge between the brain and the mind, that the brain is your physical body. And you need that brain for the mind field. The mind works as works through the brain. So both working together. So when we're working with the Eastern and Western views, we all know that whether you're looking east or west, that's the combination. There is an unconscious vast reservoir of knowledge that exists that's not brought to our conscious. It's not readily there. And I use every other people have used it too, the idea of an iceberg. Or if I take a piece of paper here, which I'll show you. So let's just assume that this is the mind. This is the part. Can you see this okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the part that's above the water line. My fingers will be the water line. This is above. This is what we're working with every day.
Sure. The
And
tip of the
look what,
iceberg.
yeah, that's right. And look what's below. There's so much. And that's why we want to go to the school of meditation, right? We want to go there so that we could go under here. We want to go to the waters, but you must have systematic training to do that. Otherwise, you could really get lost in the currents. And that's why we train meditation in a very skillful, precise, and systematic way. They're the three ingredients that are needed for that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so we know, I talked about characteristics of the mind. We know that the mind roams. So if we were to do a takeaway, like we're really talking about, the mind does roam. And we close our eyes, and what's the first thing that happens? It roams. So if you allow yourself to breathe from the head to the toe and the toes of the head, excuse me, if you do a spinal breath going to the base of the spine and back and just run the mind, you had mentioned, George, the monkey mind, up and down the spinal column for a while, it'll get over wanting to roam. You're giving it permission because it loves to move. The mind loves to move. But just know that the roaming tendencies of the mind are very, very normal. And the mind also likes to be a magician. It creates stories. It creates things. Oh, we talked about this when we were talking last week. But you're on a diet, for example. Eating chocolate cake wouldn't be good for your blood insulin. But the mind is going to say, oh, what? You've been so good all week. That's what I mean by magician mind. You've been so good all week. You could just have a little piece. Or I used to use in my sexual radiance book when it first came out. It was really a diet book. The title is really wasn't what it was about, but I used to talk to people about getting on diets and losing weight and how the refrigerator would call them at night. Just, I just need one little thing. I know I've been down that road when I lost weight when I was younger. I would say, oh, you've worked so good and you're tired, just a little something. And that little something goes into, half of an apple pie, for example. That's the mind's magician ability. It loves, but I'm just telling you, don't listen to your mind. Remember, you're the user of the mind. Bring it back home. And then, of course, I spoke about it being an instrument, as if you were in an orchestra. It has to be fine-tuned. And then I talked about all the four functions I've talked in the past of really what we need to just work with all those four functions and have an understanding. So if you're inspired by any of this, by all means, reach out. And we're here. We're here in the School of Meditation. Now that you got me interested, I usually write and I don't think about what I'm writing. And
Right, which
I
is why
try
these
to.
discussions are great. I think the other name we came up with was the Meditation Dojo, but now I really like the School of Meditation because that's very clear. Maybe we have both. Anyway, so to bring it back to to wrap up the discussion, the key takeaway that you said was that we're missing practice in our daily life, which is what you need in order to tame the mind.
Yeah, you need practice for everything. Correct. We have to make the effort. We started out by saying, when we talked about the sloth and inertia and laziness,
Right?
we really need to, and that's the whole motivation between you and I even speaking, to inspire people, to really inspire, which means inspiration, right? To move through. Let's move through that inertia. Let's move through that inertia and let everybody benefit from that so that we could really start a practice, a daily practice. A daily practice could just be getting up in the morning and honoring your own body and give it something good to eat, for example. It could be anything, but it's about a practice. And the practice means it's continual. that it's not something I'm just going to do this. No, I'm going to practice this. That's why I don't say I'm going to go meditate. I'm going to go do my practice
Hmm.
because really it's a practice. Because meditation is spontaneous once everything is relaxed. It's more, I got to go practice getting into that space. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. That's why I tell people sit at the same place all the time because the mind then gets, again, taming of the mind. It's conditioned. Oh, if I come and sit down here, this is what we're going to be doing. It's the same back to what I said in the beginning when you're training a dog. You don't one day, I mean, some people do this, but you don't get the same effect. You get them into a routine, a systematic way of being, eating on time. If people treated themselves the way they treat their animals in the way of systematizing precision, wow, this would be a pretty great place. But as I used to help people training their own animals, when you see the dog that's all over the place, many times those people have all over the place habits also. They're rushing. They're not taking the time to walk the dog, give it the proper exercise. Everything requires skillful precision and practice, a skillful, precise way with the practice. And that's the real takeaway. And practice could be 5 minutes. Just get started.
Beautiful.